Hi, today I'm chatting with Shaun Pratt about Metronet and specifically how it's going to impact suburbs like Maylands and Bayswater. Shaun is our Maylands and Bayswater suburb expert here at Bellcourt Property Group Mount Lawley, and he's also got a professional background in town planning, so has a much better understanding than most at how things like hard infrastructure and rezoning influence the livability and attractiveness of areas, as well as any impact it has on the local real estate market. Welcome, Shaun.
Thanks, Nat. Thanks for the nice introduction. So hopefully today I can answer some questions and give some guidance to what's happening in those areas and
Great.
what Metronet means. So fingers crossed.
So getting into that, before we get into the details of each suburb and the specific changes, just broadly, what are the sorts of changes that we're going to see as a result of Metronet?
Yeah, absolutely. So Metronet's really a project by the state government to increase the amount of people living close to public transport and quality public transport. So really to connect our metro area with areas that are currently unserviced or have bad public transport. So a good example of that is Ellenbrook, I think most people would know, which for years and years were promised that they'd have a train station and the connection, which hasn't happened. Metronet will eventually connect Ellenbrook and suburbs like that to the city and other employment and activity nodes. So the state government's intention is to connect people, but also to have people living closer to places of employment and activity.
Yeah. So we talk a lot in real estate about the importance of proximity to infrastructure and amenities. So overall, do you think that the changes are going to be positive for residents and investors who have got property where Metronet activity is going to be happening?
Yeah, good question. Absolutely. I think anytime you're closer to amenities or infrastructure is definitely a benefit. We can already see in our inner city suburbs where people do have infrastructure and they're close to things that the community is strong. The community enjoys where they live and they don't tend to want to move out of those suburbs, or they don't move very far. So I think these improvements to our other areas that don't currently have great infrastructure, or actually an improvement on what's already there, is definitely going to be a benefit. And you will have these extra town centres, basically, or little city centres outside of the Perth CBD. And there are a few examples of that happening through Perth over the years, but I think the Metronet and what's being proposed at the moment should actually create better than what's already been built and created before.
Yeah. So my understanding is things like train stations and like rail stops are much better at attracting investment around them than bus routes, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely data, but it's also seen that hard infrastructure, especially in WA and Australia, so trains and even, like a tram line or a light rail, tend to have better abilities to create that infrastructure and for people to develop around them. Bus routes and so on aren't as effective, and we just don't have such a, you'll know of people catching the train, but not so many people that catch a bus. And that's very much something that is not just in WA, but Australia-wide. But we've realised that. So bus networks, yes, they're great, and yes, they need to be part of it, but the key element really needs to be that hard infrastructure, so train routes and train stations. And yes, we tend to have a lot better development around those rather than around a bus station. So I think if you looked at any bus station, there wouldn't be any great development or anything overly great happening around them unless they had a train station probably connected with them.
Yeah, good point. So let's look at each of the train stations in our kind of area where we work. So Bayswater, for example, there's a lot of change that looks like it's going to be happening there. What is it specifically that you're seeing happening or know that's happening, and how do you think that's going to influence the market there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the interesting thing about Bayswater is that the old Metropolitan Redevelopment Authority, so basically the state government's redevelopment authority, has taken over a portion of Bayswater. So they will be the key authority looking after it and taking that away from the City of Bayswater. Not saying the City of Bayswater has done anything wrong or anything like that, but in some cases, to get this sort of development through, you do need state government involvement to connect key stakeholders and developers and so forth, to really bring that development together and cohesively, because it can be difficult bringing stakeholders and everyone else together just privately and just letting the open market do what it likes. So that's the interesting and exciting bit about Bayswater. So they have, around the Bayswater train station, identified an area where they will be targeting, where the density will increase, and with key, and it's all sort of changed a little bit, but with key design criteria and so on as part of that. There are heritage elements. The City of Bayswater have recently identified that. So there's a little bit of disagreement in the community over what is character or heritage in that portion, but the local community definitely want to keep a lot of the fabric and the identity that Bayswater has and that village sort of feel. So I think that will come out and create Bayswater into something that's quite unique, and have its well, so it has its own identity. But the train station also is the important thing to note there, that will connect to the Perth airport, but also the new train link out along Ellenbrook and the other suburbs on the way. So Bayswater will really become this new hub and be at the connection of quite a few different suburbs and areas. And the connectivity to the Perth airport, I think, is going to really open up the corridor to some new buyers that maybe wouldn't have considered there before for some different reasons. But yeah, there's definitely some interesting things to happen through Bayswater. And I think it is a positive move.
I think it'd be fair to say we've actually seen a lot of interest in Bayswater, haven't we? Just particularly over the last couple of years, as people realised that this development was going to happen, but also, you know, the attractiveness of the area and the character homes and the proximity to the city. It's really been rediscovered, hasn't it? It's gotten a very kind of proactive community there too.
Absolutely. Bayswater properties are always, you know, typically in high demand. Bayswater is a big suburb, so there are a lot of different property types.
Yeah.
But, you know, anywhere around that town centre sort of train station sort of area, there's a great community feel. Everyone's sort of together and wanting great outcomes. But the demand for Bayswater is strong. You know, it can be stronger than some of the inner city suburbs in terms of the demand. So, and that's because it has a varied nature, and it's got that, it's close enough to the city, but it's still quiet. You know, there's different bits. So it really suits a large range of people. So yeah, Bayswater's definitely done really well recently.
Yeah. And those more affordable price points, of course, as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, first home buyers can afford to enter into the area, you know, with some certain property types. Families can afford to have a bit larger property and a bit more land if they need it. And now with these changes, there's going to be additional property types to choose from with a bit higher density. So for people that are wanting to downsize or want something new or low maintenance and lock up and leave, those options will now become available, which weren't so readily available before.
Yeah. And moving down one, Meltham train station, interesting, like little station. When you talk about like plonked in the middle of nowhere with very little that's kind of been developed around it. But now there's talk about changing the suburb name around it, rezoning all around it. What sort of things might be happening or are happening around Meltham?
Yeah, absolutely. Meltham's a really interesting example again. So a community group, so the state government, part of Metronet, they do consultation with the community, which is great. The consultation with these new planning initiatives has really improved over the years. So the community group have sort of proposed even the potential to rename the area around Meltham Station to call the suburb Meltham, which is really interesting because I haven't personally seen anything like that before or recently. And I think that's really to give it its own identity and that it has its own sense of place. Again, as I mentioned before, Bayswater is a big suburb, so there are lots of different pockets and little communities that are through Bayswater, which all have their, great elements to them. But I think this community, when they've seen that, yes, we're going to redevelop and there's going to be increased density, there's going to be what's called mixed use development, so apartments above commercial or retail. They wanted to give it its own identity and its own sort of town centre naming as well as part of that. So I think that hasn't, there's been no decisions made on that just at the moment, but it's out for discussion, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Will, yeah.
Yeah.
You see some of the debate around, on the community forums and things like that. And it's like anything. You've got people that are for, people that are against, people that are worried about the change.
Yeah.
By and large, I think certainly the rezoning is supported and people can see the advantage for the area. But there's still, I think, quite a bit that needs to be worked through.
Yeah, there's still a lot of work there to be done. The state government have been quite forceful in their rezonings. And the reason for that is historically some local governments weren't really pulling their weight in assisting the local government to find places for increased density, increased population for the future. So the state governments had to take a step back, look at the Greater Perth metropolitan area and identify the areas that will have extra population, and then request or require the local governments to have that. So Meltham, they sort of did push it through a little bit to have that rezoning go on. I think the community knows that it's going to, it's not if but when. So they are on board and trying to make it as best as possible. So, which is great, because you do need the community to be involved, and the community will get to give its own character to that suburb, which they already do. You go through Bayswater, Maylands and surrounds, you can identify the different little areas and communities within. So, but yeah, definitely very interesting. There's always people that are going to be for and against. Change is uncomfortable for some, and there is pain that comes as part of change. So for things to get better or to improve, that has to happen. So yes, some people aren't going to like it, but the great thing with Bayswater and surrounds, you do have choice. If you really don't like something that's happening in a train station, you can always relocate a little bit further, into a different direction and find what you like.
Yeah, this is true. So like Maylands, so last but not least, Maylands, like that's undergone significant renaissance in recent years. And was it last year or the year before, it was voted by Lonely Planet as one of the 3 coolest suburbs in Australia. They had already gone through quite a bit of zoning change already through the suburb, and there's been quite a lot of new development that's been happening there, and laneways, and when we're out of the other side of COVID-19, we can get back to the small bars and all of those kind of things that exist. Are there further changes and improvements that we should expect to see around the train station there?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, Maylands has gone through a lot of change over the years, and it continues to. For it to be rated as one of the top 3 coolest places in Australia was quite exciting for the community. And the community's done a lot of hard work to create a really cool and vibrant sort of area. And there's been new businesses. This is pre-COVID-19, but new businesses start up. And even with COVID-19 now, they're all rallying together. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I've actually been so proud of what's been happening in the Maylands community, and been sharing a lot of that online through social media. So they've really rallied together. So I think much like Bayswater and surrounds, these communities are strong and they're already working together. So anything that happens, I think it's going to be really, really exciting. What's happened in Maylands is they went through a lot of their rezoning and the acknowledgement that it needed to be a town centre and have increased density quite some time ago. So, those documents were approved, nearly 10 years ago, but the planning phase would have been much longer before that. So some of those documents are a little bit outdated compared to what's happening with Bayswater and surrounds. So I wouldn't be surprised if they get a bit of a revamp or revisit in the future, when the planning authorities have time to do that. But I think there's some good elements, of course, still in that, you can see if you walk around Maylands that a lot of the heritage facades of the retail outlets have been kept, and then there's apartments hidden behind. So I think another thing that I'd just like to stress is that with rezonings and further development, it's not necessarily high rise or what you might be seeing maybe in South Perth and surrounds. What's proposed is medium sort of density. So, you know, it sort of sits between 2 to 5, in some cases 6 if there's allowances under these proposals. So most of it won't affect the urban fabric too much. So they're not going to be eyesores or what you expect from flats or what you've seen before. And the state government have also recently done some great work on creating new policies and requirements for apartment developments to ensure that we have quality apartments when they're built, that, you know, multiple families can live in them, you know, couples, shared house arrangements, because what we didn't want to see is lots of apartments being built where only one person resides in them, which sort of undermines exactly what the reason is to create them, is to have more people living around there and some vibrancy. So I think Maylands also has a bright future with that. It's already got a lot of commercial retail sort of aspect, which is where most of the development is proposed. So it won't really affect or change too much of the residential housing and nature, you know, further away from that already exists. So I think it's just a further improvement, and it'll allow more people to work and live closer, to Maylands and the surrounds.
I think this is one of the things, isn't it? Because, you know, these activity corridors that are being developed, and I look at Beaufort Street as an example, it's all well and good for the community to say, we want more shops, we want more restaurants, we want more cafes, but you have to have the population to support it. And if you don't have small businesses operating there, if you don't have residents living there, you don't have the population to spend the money to keep these businesses. They're just not going to be viable. You've got to have that lift in density. And by focusing on those activity corridors, you're, you know, kind of still keeping or retaining much of the residential amenity that existed, and focusing your development where there's the infrastructure to support that higher density.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, for us to have more retail and more choice, there has to be population that comes with that, because otherwise the businesses can't support themselves with a small client base. There has to be people around to allow for that sort of environment and that sort of, you know, those great things that come in with businesses and everything else. So much like Europe, I find that always a good example, and that's where a lot of town planning, you know, is taken from. The good elements of that is that to have al fresco dining and all those things that we really love when we travel overseas, that you do need the population there. So if you look up, there are apartments of 4 to 5 stories above those to support that. But another great thing in Western Australia is that we have a lot of parks and open space, and that's a planning initiative that was put in place, you know, a really long time ago when Perth was first sort of developing. Most of our developments required 10% of the development to be public open space or to provide for that. So despite having increased density, we've still got a lot of places to enjoy outside. So I think people will be noticing that now with COVID-19, that we're often not too far away from a park or somewhere to enjoy some fresh open space when we're meant to be going out and doing our exercise. So I don't think it's as scary or anything like that as people sort of think it may be. So yeah, definitely some good things I think will happen out of all this.
And certainly City of Bayswater is really across the whole tree canopy thing, aren't they? They really understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. City of Bayswater is a very green local government, which I really like. It's a bit of a green by background. Absolutely. Tree canopies and requiring people to have a certain amount of, landscaping and requirements for that when they develop is a great thing. So, going off topic, but tree canopies are a great thing to stop the urban heat island effect. So if you basically have concrete everywhere, you heat the area up. But if you have trees and vegetation to assist, it helps mitigate that impact. City of Bayswater are right on top of that, which is great. So
good to know.
I think the City of Bayswater, coupled with what's Development WA, which is the new name for the MRA, will do some great things.
So, sure, there's so much we can talk about when it comes to Metronet and all of the micro changes. And as we mentioned, you know, each of those suburbs is very unique, and then you've got very unique pockets within each of those suburbs. If I'm a property owner or investor or a buyer that's interested in Maylands and Bayswater, and I want to get some more information about how these changes might impact my own property or my future buying and investment decisions, is that the sort of thing that you can help with, and how should people get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. As you can see, I could talk about this for hours. Being in real estate, I don't always get to utilize my planning skills and being a town planner like I used to, but I'm definitely more than happy to help anyone out that wants some advice how it might affect their property, or how these changes which are nearby their property or in their suburbs may impact them. So yeah, absolutely. People can contact me on my mobile direct, which is 0466 822 050, or just follow me on my social channels. So on Instagram and Facebook, my name is Sold with Shaun, so that's Shaun SHAUN. You can see what I'm up to and just send me a message every now and then if you want some advice. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Always more than happy to help with this stuff or anything relating to development or subdivisions that you may need assistance with.
And I think that'll give us quite a few kind of future topics to talk about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd always love to talk about how you can subdivide, renovation, all that sort of stuff, all my favourite topics.
Yeah. Wonderful. Shaun, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. We'll have Shaun's details up on the end slide. And if there's anything he can help with, or I can help with, or we at Bellcourt Lawley can help with, get in touch. Thanks and have a great day.
Thanks.